How about that? How about we start over? Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you very much, Jarvis Gardner. In the chat, I had the mic muted before I started. So, welcome everyone to the first episode of the review show for A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the new HBO show. Um, I'm very excited to be talking about this. I had this whole thing planned out. We've been doing the other videos, the review for the book, the novella, for the comic book, and then of course all the other stuff. Thanks for letting me know that this sounds good now. But I think my main takeaway is that this premiere fully shows that this is not trying to be Game of Thrones. And I think that's the biggest strength because the novella itself was not Game of Thrones. It was something completely different. So I'm very excited to get into this. We're going to talk about a few things, including the tone of the show, kind of what happens in this first episode. We'll talk a little bit about the performances. And if you have any questions, make sure to drop them in the chat, or if you're watching this later on, drop them in the comments and we can get those answered on the next show. But if you're not familiar with this show, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is part of the Game of Thrones mythology. It takes place between the events of House of the Dragon, which is the other show that's ongoing, and also the Game of Thrones show that ended years ago. But this is on a much smaller scale, based on a novella by George R. R. Martin called The Hedge Knight. This show is really like the street level show for Game of Thrones. So don't expect any like big world ending events happening here. But I think that's what I'm looking for in this show. And they really have accomplished a lot of that with this. So let's talk about the tone of the show because I think it really wants to cement its own identity, just like the novellas did. There's This show's really fun. Like it's entertaining. There's a lot of humor to it. I think immediately there's a kind of a misdirect, right, where the Game of Thrones theme starts to play a little bit, and you're like, "Oh, here we go." But then they do a little swerve, and it. I'm sure that many people might find that maybe a little bit disrespectful, but I think I find it just kind of a cheeky way to tell the audience, like, you are watching a show in the world of Game of Thrones, but this is not Game of Thrones, right? So I really like that a lot. I think that the show understands that this is just about this night, Sir Duncan the Tall, hanging out with Egg at this tournament at Ashford, and they're going to get into a lot of trouble. So I really like that a lot. So speaking of that, our protagonist, Dunk, is portrayed by Peter Claffey, who is a very physical, like very tall dude. Like really, as I've recently read the comics and I recently reread the book, the description fits perfectly. He is a tall man that is just kind of like a little bit silly, a little bit goofy, but you can tell. And Peter Caffey plays Dunk very well intentioned, but also very naive. And I think that's a really good performance, or at least characterization of who Dunk is supposed to be. And then we have Egg, played by Dexter Sol Ansell, who we don't get to see as much of, but we do have a couple of really good scenes. We have the meeting in the barn, and then of course we have the later meeting at Ashford. So I like their chemistry. I've seen a few interviews with both of them, and it appears that because a lot of the show revolves around them, they were just kind of hanging out a lot. Now, Dexter, who plays Egg, he was 9 years old when they shot all this stuff, and I bet they're shooting stuff right now because this is going to be, I believe they're going to do 3 seasons, which makes sense. That'll cover the 3 novellas in the world of this Hedge Knight story. But he's a young performer, but he's really good, and he really gives you that little smart aleck type of performance that Egg really brings onto the page, right? That's how George R. R. Martin kind of characterized the him as a whole. So I like that a lot. We get to see some other characters that are also very interesting. What's his name? Sir Joffrey, the Laughing Storm, the Baratheon. He's one of probably the main, probably one of the main people at least that we're gonna see for now. And it's really interesting that Dunk kind of gets thrown into this world, not really knowing what's going on. So yeah, I enjoy that a lot. I like seeing that this show feels very much street level, feels very much like a small thing, and that's kind of what I wanted to see. Even as we get to Ashford, Ashford is a small little place. Like it's not, there's no like a giant castle. This is just a place that happens to be holding a tournament because they are celebrating something. So that's really interesting as well. So I think that this is going to be a really fun show to talk about over the next 6 weeks, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So, yeah, let's see. Let's talk about a few more other things. This show does not lean into some of the tropes that Game of Thrones kind of had us used to. There's really not a lot of like magic or anything like that. There's no dragons except for the puppet that we see. There's no giant maps. They didn't even really have like an intro. Maybe they'll have one for the next episode, but there wasn't like a sprawling intro that we're seeing, like where all the different factions are formed, because we're just following Dunk and Egg, right? I like that a lot. I think that there's still that level of like, this is the hierarchy of people, like these are lords, but we're not going to see the king or like somebody that's coming to attack the king or anything like that. It's just, we're just going to see a little bit of like knights hanging around. And even there, and there's a hierarchy within the knights, right? There's knights from different houses, and then there's also these hedge knights. Now, for those that may not know, a hedge knight, they got their name because they don't serve any specific lord. They're kind of like knights for hire, and they sleep on the outside. They sleep by the hedges, and that's where they find like that's how they kind of get their name. So they don't have any lineage. They're just kind of like, they're the working man for the knights, right? Which is good to see the small folk, to see how their stories kind of unfold during this show. Um, there's a little bit of I think Game of Thrones got us used to seeing a little bit of the human anatomy, but I think it's used very sparsely here, which that also goes to see the changing of the tone of the show. This is not a show where we're going to see a lot of intense, content, if we want to call it that. So I like the way that this story is kind of unfolding. I think another really interesting thing is that every time we kind of go back to see the flashbacks of Dunk as a child, or when he was learning from um, from some Arlen. It's really fun to see how that stuff is kind of flashbacks, right? It's not, we don't spend a lot of time. I don't think we even hear Dunk as a when he was younger. We just see kind of flashbacks of him remembering these key events that are kind of build him who he is. So I really like that. I think Claffey really has a very honest portrayal of the character, and really brings a lot to that character when it comes to being sincere or sounding sincere. This show really is all about the chivalry of being a knight, and I think that's what's gonna get him into trouble. Because sometimes when you're fair, when you fight the good fight in this world, things don't always play out your way. So, all right, let's see. We did get to see. We're gonna talk about the upcoming feature, or the little trailer for this season on, but that'll be at the end of the show because I don't want to spoil anything big. Um, I I think overall we have introduced maybe sort of a love interest. We've introduced a lot of the players. I think they did a really good job translating some of the house sigils to really feel like they're coming into this world, that the world that they've established visually in the shows. If you read the comics, or if you kind of go through there's some illustrations in the books, like the sigils for the houses, they look very kind of goofy. And I think it plays out like, if your house sigil is an apple, like how badass can you make that, in a sense. But the show really manages to capture that. It's really like the way that it's portrayed here. I think it really works. um One of my favorite scenes from this episode is when Dunk goes in the Baratheon tent, and after he gets kind of not scolded, but just kind of like question of like, what's he doing there. There's kind of like a dance off sequence, which is like a weird thing to say for for a Game of Thrones show, but that just kind of goes to show you that this show is not about taking itself too seriously. I think there will be serious moments, which we'll see in the future, but this show is about having a good time and just showing you what happens in the life of everyday people for the most part, right? Now, obviously, knights are still probably a little higher in the pecking order when it comes to the small folk, but still, we're not spending the whole day in the castle. If anything, I don't think that Dunk spent more than a few hours like inside of somewhere with a roof. Most of the time he was outside with his horses or hanging out with Egg, or just walking around trying to figure out somebody to vouch for him. So all right. I'm going to go over some of the events of the show, and then we'll talk a little bit about the stuff that's coming up next. I'll go through any questions that the audience may have, and then we'll close it out. Um, so after Sir Arlen passes, Dunk takes everything and he's gonna go to a tournament in Ashford to try to make some money because he realizes he could sell the horses, he could sell the armor, but then what's he gonna do once he runs out of money, right? The only thing he knows how to do is be a knight, and that's all he can do. So once that happens, we see that he runs into Egg, who he believes to be a stable boy, and he asks him to. I love that they keep, the dialogue is very true to the books, where like he'll give him a cloud in the ear. I don't even know what that means. As far as like, what is a cloud in the air? That's a really fun expression, but you understand that as he will be reprimanded physically. Uh, but Dunk is not a violent man by his nature. So I like that. I appreciate that. That really comes into play when it comes to their relationship and their banter together with Dunk and Egg. Dunk gets to Ashford and he tries to enter the tournament, but somebody has to vouch for him because although any knight can make another knight, uh, Dunk, there was nobody there to witness him, being knighted by his former knight that he was squiring for. So since that is in doubt, he tries to ask a few of the knights that he knows, or at least look for them. Which this brings some of the funny moments, right? When he's looking for um, somebody to vouch for him. But ultimately, nobody does. He does get invited to that party in the Baratheon tent. We have the dance sequence, which I think is really fun. It really feels very different from anything we've seen in Game of Thrones. So I like that. I like that there's a little bit of levity and humor and just a lot of fun for really anyone. I like this show overall. Like it doesn't feel like Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. I would not be like this is kind of a family show. This is as family as this will get in the world of Game of Thrones. So all right. And then after that, he goes back to his camp. He sees that Egg is there. Now, Egg has done everything he can to kind of prove that he's worthy of being there and hanging out and helping him be a squire. So he ultimately agrees, and that's kind of where we end the episode. So we still have a lot of stuff coming up. We have a big conflict, and that's kind of what they show you in the weeks ahead. This is only going to be 6 episodes because this is a short novella. Like if you the last visit to the novella I had was in form of the audiobook, and it was like about 3 hours long. So that makes sense. 6 episodes in between, 30 to 45 minutes each. I think the premiere's probably the longest episode, maybe the premiere and the last episode. So yeah, I'm interested in seeing how this is going to play out with the pacing. What are they going to add to the show to kind of pad the runtime a little bit? Because, like I said, this is only a 3-hour book. So I don't know how many pages it is in the novella. It's been a while since I've actually had the actual book. But yeah, I'm excited to see where we go from here. And I was very excited to hear the creator of the show really highlight how this is trying to be very different from the Game of Thrones that we may know from other places. So there you have it. That's all we have now for the Game of Thrones, kind of recap. Uh, Ultimately, I recommend you check this out. If you were kind of burnt out by Game of Thrones and how they ended things, which, I didn't mind any of that stuff. I'm still watching House of the Dragon as well. I like all these shows. I like this world that George R. R. Martin has created. But if you were kind of burnt out and you wanted something maybe different, you should try the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. I keep trying to call it the Hedge Knight because that's what I've known it for over 20 years now. But yeah, you should try this show. It's very different. Different in tone, different in what it's trying to accomplish, even different in just like the scope of the world that we are going to see in this show. So, as always, make sure to go back and check out our other videos. I did a review for the novella. I did a review for the comic adaptation. And then if you want a little bit more scrutiny, I have a video on 5 things that I expect from this show to get right about the adaptation. And of course, if you're watching this later on, make sure to come back. I'll try to do this every Sunday after the show. It doesn't help that this show got moved to the 9 p.m. slot in Eastern time. Normally, I would expect this to be the earlier show. I guess it's 10 p.m. Eastern, but I'm in the Central time zone. So I was expecting this to be at 8 and then Industry to be at 9, but they've kind of flipped them, and it kind of makes sense. Industry has it's their fourth season. They already have a following built in, but I was really expecting this to be the mainstay show of Sunday nights at HBO. So we'll see. We'll see if they. I don't know if they're gonna change that. I don't think they would. It doesn't make sense that they would. But well, anyways, yeah, stick around. We'll keep coming back here every Sunday night to talk about the show. I'm very excited to see where we go from here. Thanks for everybody that watched live. Thanks for everybody that's watching this later on. And stay tuned because we have a lot more stuff on the channel, including comic reviews, trailer reactions, TV recaps. We just did our best comics of 2025 this weekend when you're watching this video. And then the previous weekend, we did our best movies of 2025. So yeah, if you wanna watch some more videos, more discussions with the rest of the gang, check those out. And then of course, make sure to leave a comment, leave a question, and let me know what you thought about the show. So we'll see you guys on the next go round. Yeah, very excited to stick around here in Westeros and have a good time for a few weeks. So we'll see you later. Bye bye.